V'hinei echad min haklalim hagedolim. One of the great rules, the darkei hashgacha, in the ways of hashgacha, of divine providence, understanding how God functions in the world. Even though Hashem sees everything that happens, Yodea kol hametzius. He knows all of existence. He knows everything that happens in the world. But He has designed it in such a way. It's as if God doesn't know anything that we don't tell Him. In other words, even though He's omniscient, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu functions is that He turns it into as if He's not aware of what's going on unless you make Him aware, like a computer. Only know what the data that you input into the computer. And here's the rule: This is the rule that applies to many different corners or facets of divine providence. And the point is to enable Tselem Elokim, the image of God, and that's us, we're Tselem Elokim. Human beings are Tselem Elokim. We are formed in the image of God. And Bechira, and free will to exist. Because if we were always aware that God was always aware, then we wouldn't have free will. Right? So the key is free will, and real humanity emerges when God Kiviyachol acts as if He only knows what we tell Him. Right? He's not present all along. And that's kind of like the conundrum. That's kind of the challenge of Hashem hiding and being present. If He's present all along, we would not be able to exist as independent entities. The same thing is true not just with our free will, but our tzaras. When it comes to providence, God's overseeing the universe. That the way it is it's only visible in the eyes of heaven when we spell things out for God. But if we don't spell it out, then ultimately it's as if He doesn't know. Chamas al nafsho olechet lishol al shu b'tzara gedola ve'ayuma az olam advarim nerem kivachol l'fnei habarei. If we cry out of pain, out of desperation, and we ask God for assistance, then He starts to pay attention to us. As like a parent who has mercy on the child, who awakens from the cries of the child. Like a parent who listens to a child no matter what, when the child is crying out. So when we say, "Save me, God," those cries, those tears reach Hashem. And nothing can prevent that cry. As the rabbis taught in the Gemara, famous Gemara in Bava Metzia, Kol hashara ninalu chutz misharei ona v'dima. All gates today, out of the Beis Hamikdash, are locked, the exception of the gates that deal with ona and dima. Ona is distress or persecution, and dima are tears. Mashal Abba shekas al beno. Parable, that means if someone is persecuted, God does not respond kindly to that. God does not want to see us persecuted, and He does not want to see anyone who cries. Right? And we learn this from Mitzrayim. When we start to cry out in our distress, Mitzrayim, Hashem takes notice. Mashal Abba shekas al beno. There's a parable of a father who is angry at his son. Basically throws him out of the house. lachniso. He may hear him crying outside the door. Please help me. But he's not going to be softened. He's not going to be, what do you call it? He's not going to let him back in if he's upset. But if he hears a sudden, desperate cry, save me, Father, save me, screaming, there's a lion standing here and he's approaching me and he's trying to tear me apart. Won't the father rush to the door quickly to open it up and bring his son inside to take him away from the lion? So the point is that there are things that can damage the relationship that we have with God. We do them all the time. And there are things that simply don't motivate that response anymore. But the thing that always works is a desperate child crying at the door, asking to be saved. And it's a secret formula, a secret language that we have to know how to use. Right? Children can effectively use that tool to appeal to their parents' good nature and sympathies. But the same thing is we can do that to Hashem. So, truth is, this is a proper allegory. Bottom of page 53. But it's better, more effective, if we use a much more simplistic parable, a much more obvious parable. The parable of a person whose father is the expert cardiologist. He's the top heart surgeon or cardiologist in the world. And he's an expert in heart disease. And the son is suddenly ill, God forbid, with some sort of heart disease. He's lying in his bed, he's on his deathbed, and he's sitting there, or sick bed rather, and he's languishing. And his friends come in there and say, how's it possible? Your own father is the world-renowned expert in heart disease. And you are lying in bed. He's not here trying to heal you. He's helping other people at the moment. Isn't your father the top expert in the world? Amar lo ben, the son says, Pashut, my father doesn't know that I'm sick. I never picked up the phone, never told him. Because he doesn't know I'm sick, he's not here. This is the parable that we can use to understand our circumstance when we approach God about any need that we have. Those words roll off our tongues. We say them in Tehillim Kuf Lamed anytime there's a crisis or a person who's a chole. Hashem, listen to my voice. May your ears hearken to the voice of my entreaty. Harei zug zeras akasav. This is a Gzeras HaKasav. It's a Torah law or a Tanakh rule that it's as if God listens using what we're describing as ears. Now, obviously, God doesn't have ears. But yet, David HaMelech described God as using ears. Meaning, he does not make use of his omniscient nature and Ruach HaKodesh to know everything. And therefore, if we don't tell him about it, it's as if he doesn't know. They know zos shenorahu ad kama bedarke hashgacha advarim kipshutim. This is something that is a great idea in understanding hashgacha, how God functions in the world and oversees the world. It's as if the divine voice is calling out and saying, why don't you tell me what's bothering you? Tell me what's hurting you. And then I'll come to your aid. But if we don't tell God, then already it's not going to happen. You can't assume that he just sees you and he knows what to do. You have to assume in tefillah that God doesn't hear you until you make it known. For whatever reason, he has desired for the mechanism of tefillah to be the way in which you inform him of your needs. Okay, pause for a second. Daled, V'hinei Ramban, the Sefer Mitzvos. The Ramban in the Sefer HaMitzvos writes, Shecholik al HaRambam, he argues on the Maimonides, the Savar lay, the Mitzvos say, the Rambam says there's a positive commandment every day to daven. Right? This is the halacha. There is no positive commandment to daven every day. When it says ulavdo in the Torah, there's one opinion that refers to Torah, and one says it refers to, in the Shema, it refers to tefillah. So asmachta, that's not a Torah law. That's what's called an asmachta. It's a rabbinic support for a principle. So he says that we have to be, our eyes have to be and hearts to Hashem as servants who look to the masters who get what they need. This is all the Ramban on the Rambam. The Ramban says that it's not a doraisa, it's a rabbinic obligation. So we have a machlokes rishonim, is davening a Torah law or is davening a rabbinic law? Rambam says it's a Torah law, Ramban says it's a rabbinic law. And the Sefer HaChinuch writes in Mitzvah Tov Lamed Gimel, that's the number mitzvah, right? So 433, Mitzvah 433, what does he say? Ulam ein lano b'zos mitzvah zman kavulasos. It's a mitzvah in the Torah according to the Rambam, but it's not a mitzvah that has a set time. Nekin misafkin ravosena b'inyan. The Ram says the mitzvah is daven every day. The Torah never commanded us to daven every day. Rather, what's the mitzvah? Whenever you need him to daven. So according to Rambam, you have to daven every day, and then you insert the needs of the day, whereas Ramban is saying you have to only daven when you need him. So a mitzvah kasav and noagos a mitzvah, noagos a mitzvah zuba chol makom cholzman, right? And that this mitzvah applies in every single scenario and place. You could daven anywhere. Over al zeh amad yom v'layla below tefillah klal bito asay zeh kedas Rambam yishtzar lo v'lo karas Hashem yisparach lo shiyah bato asay zu kedas Ramban. Okay, so if a person goes a whole day and doesn't daven, according to the Rambam, what have they done? They've lost out a positive commandment. And if a person has a crisis and they don't daven, then according to Ramban, they've lost an opportunity to do a mitzvah. Let me see, the Ramban is quoted le halacha. So let's just summarize the two opinions and then go on. The Rambam says that davening is a mitzvah d'oraisa. Torah requires us to daven. The Ramban says it's not from the Torah; it's a smachta. It's from the rabbis. And when is the mitzvah to daven? Only when you don't have to daven every day, like the Rambam says. Rather, you have to daven whenever you have a crisis, a problem. It's based on the situation, as opposed to it's a pay per view kind of relationship with Hashem. Whenever I need him, I call out to him. Rambam says no. You need a general subscription. Whether you decide to watch the programs that are available or not, that's up to you. But you got to have a general subscription. You got to check in every day and daven, whether there's a need or whether there's nothing to watch. So now, according to the Ramban, if you go a day and if you're on vacation and nothing's bothering you and everything's good in your life, and you don't daven, you haven't lost an opportunity. According to Rambam, that's a lost mitzvah. According to Ramban, if you have a crisis and you don't daven, you've lost a mitzvah. According to Rambam, not necessarily. So let's say you have a crisis at 2 p.m. It's too early. You haven't done mincha yet. It's not time for Maariv. You've already done Shachris. According to Rambam, you don't have to say anything. According to Ramban, at that moment, you have to daven. You're in a quandary. You've got an issue right there. You have an obligation not to sour the moment, and you have to call it to God. Does everyone understand the Machlokes Rishonim? Okay. Yesh laha'ir kan halacha nor lamaisa. Based on this, we can make a following wondrous insight that will affect the practical way in which we relate to Hashem. Whenever something happens to you, that disturbs you, that bothers you, that puts you in distress, right away you're obligated to start davening at that moment. This is the illustration I just mentioned. Let's say you've davened Shachris already, it's now 11 a.m. And then you get a flat tire. Something happens that ruins your day, right? You have a cave gadol, or you have a monster headache. Or the deal that you were working on for 3 months fell through and you lose finances, or the stock market crashes, right? According to Ramban, which the chinuch brings down the halacha, you now have a mitzvah in that moment that was generated in that very moment to start davening. I've already fulfilled my obligation in that which I davened earlier, and I don't have to daven any further until mincha. According to Ramban, you'd have an obligation in the Torah to at least do something now, a small prayer. And we would have to understand, what is the Ramban talking about? What would be that little tefillah that you'd be obligated to utter in that moment? That's a good question, something we'd have to explore according to Ramban. Okay. They say about Maran Hagriz, Rav Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, Brisker Rav, Shayu Niflotin Mipiv Tfilos Gam Be'emtza Dibur Manash, that he would regularly say Tfilos in the middle of conversations with other people. They are Margala Befume, one of the gems that would regularly come out of his mouth. Pearls of wisdom that he would often utter. Margala Befume. Lishuascha kivisi Hashem. He used to say, for your salvation I have waited, God. I hope, I long for your salvation, Hashem. Ragil Mefarish. And he used to explain. Why did he do? Davkuso leboro. This was a product of his incredible closeness that he felt with his Creator. He was always so close to God that he was always ready to call out in prayer. Obviously, there's no doubt that this is the truth, but there's another great yesod. That he felt that a person was obligated in that moment to daven whenever there was an hour of distress. It's so hard to measure what is the requirement from the Torah. How do you quantify tzara? If the Ramban is correct that every time you go through difficulty you have to daven, well, then don't you need a sefer quantifying, at least a chapter in a book on prayer, quantifying tzara? What is tzaras? And that's a difficult thing to do, especially for two Jews. You get together, you have 7 opinions about what tzaras is. You think you have tzaras, I have tzaras. You don't know what tzaras is. And everybody will start to get upset because they don't know how to quantify someone else's tzar. You're telling me I'm not upset? You're telling me that I shouldn't be mad? I shouldn't be sad? So all of these things are hard to put onto paper. And therefore, he was choshish, he was concerned, the Brisker Rav, that how do you fulfill that? Therefore, the moment he had a sort of an uncomfortable feeling, he would just daven l'shuascha kivisi Hashem. For your salvation I long, I hope, and that would be something he would say regularly. And let's say someone was talking to him, and he needed to give over counsel. Someone comes to his office, says, Rav, I don't know what to do. Here's my problem. And they're wearing their heart on their sleeve. They just don't, they're in total distress. And if you want to give over proper advice, at that moment is not just the achrayis, the otzem achrayis shehergish listos min emes, the awesome burden of responsibility that maybe he felt in that moment, not to distort the truth, to give over proper eitzah, that created for the rabbi, for the advisor, a moment of distress, because he wanted to advise his constituent properly. Which generated for him in that moment, an adam prati, an individual person, a personal deoraisa Torah obligation to pray in that moment. Even though it's not so clear to explain this, Banhagas Maran Ariz, and by the way, I know I'm taking poetic liberties here, trying to explain what Rav Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik was thinking. But my guess is that this is the right thing. He admits that it's impossible to really know what the Brisker Rav was thinking when he'd start to daven in the middle of the conversation. Right? Maybe he had ADD, spiritual ADD. But in all likelihood, it was because he felt like the Ramban, that in the moment you have an obligation to talk to God. By the way, it's perfectly normal today to stop a conversation and to check your email. Not saying it's polite, it's just perfectly normal. You get a buzz, you go, oh, someone's texting me, someone's sending me a WhatsApp message. I got to check the latest figure in the game. But the point is that if that's acceptable, at the very least, someone comes to us with a heavy matter and we're talking to them, or you confronted with scary news, right away at tefillah. This morning during my daf yomi, I saw bad news. Someone sent me a text that someone passed away. So I stopped the shir and I said, Baruch Dayamas. That's what we do. That would be normal. Why is that normal? Because crisis hits you and you have to talk to God. You have to express it in some way. Ramban says you cannot let that moment be squandered. That is a personal Torah law that you have to daven in that moment. Rav Schechter, when he got his vaccine, which later became a controversy because people want to see rabbis do evil things and they wanted to turn into a controversy. Really, he did nothing wrong. He was really doing the right thing. But anyway, he got his shot. And when he got his shot, so he uttered a tefillah, right? He davened at that moment. And they said to him, the Rav, I saw you made a, is it Tova Meitiv? I don't remember if you made a Tova Meitiv in the moment. He made some bracha. And he felt that a person has to make a bracha when they get the COVID shot. A moment of Akar Tov, a moment of crisis. It wasn't a mitzvah, but you have an obligation, according to Ramban, to express that into words in that moment and talk to God.
Well, I think that too, you don't, with the davening of 3 times a day, the regularity of that, if something very special or meaningful happens, you don't want to just wait for that next routine time, that you want to acknowledge it at the moment, because that's when it's happening and that's the most meaningful point, rather than saying, well, 6 hours from now, I'll just throw it in to my regular mincha davening.
I'll make a note. I'll jot it in my journal and make sure I point it out in this paragraph later on. Yeah, it's not going to be the same. There's no question about it. But could you imagine you have turbulence on an airplane and you feel that sense of your stomach just drop down, and then everybody gets a little bit queasy and everybody gets a little bit nervous and their muscles are tightening up and the seatbelts go on and people get very quiet. All of a sudden there's a hush on the plane, right? And what do? You start to say Shema. for like the 13th time that day because there's been pockets of turbulence. You'll say Shema again. You're not going to, well, it's technically it's not Tefillah, I already said it already, I'm not chayev. You don't start to get into a halachic debate as to whether you're obligated to Shema. You scream Shema at that moment because you're scared for your life. Would it make sense to wait till 3 hours later when you have to daven with a minyan at the set time to say, oh, remember that time that I was in distress? I wanted to say this. It's a joke. Of course you're going to say it in the moment. So I think, Karen, that's really that really is the idea that it would not be as effective to wait. Hergel she'im sas ma'ametz yafoch etzel liot teva. In truth, right, and just to follow along, we are I lost the place in English. Okay, yeah. That if a person becomes, I guess, accustomed to it, he maila niflash al kol tsar o inyan nechutz she'istam lo la'ad mitzchan miyad b'tefila katzar l'akadosh baruch Hu. We become accustomed to every time we confront a little problem, we utter a small prayer. Kama niflaim hem divrei chinuch b'zeh. How wondrous is this idea? Over al zeh, there we go, Shira, you were mechavenet exactly for this. You understood exactly before you even read this. That once you begin uttering a prayer for all those moments, how acutely aware you become of the divine providence in your life. And if you don't do it, it's as if you've suggested that God is not part of your life right now. That there's a separate moment in my life. He exists 3 times a day when I daven. Half an hour in the morning, 15 minutes for mincha, another 10 minutes for ma'ariv. That's when God exists in my life. The rest of the day, he's not in charge. Because I don't have to pray to him now. That if someone was next to you, helping you, let's say you had a friend who was in crisis, and they gave you a phone call. They say, can you help me? I'm stuck. My car, it's not starting. I need a jump start. You go, well, I'm available tomorrow at 3 p.m. Let me see if I can slot you in. Doesn't make any sense. Of course you'd respond in the moment, or you'd get someone who could, or you'd call AAA. Someone's going up a ladder, and the rung begins to shake or threatens to break. Or the ladder is rickety. What will you do? You're going to call out to the person below, hold the ladder. And therefore, if someone experiences in their life, if you always knew that God was with you, why would you not call out and say, God, I long for your salvation. Hold this ladder so I don't fall. And in this, there's another important element. That all the time, in our heart, we cry out to ourselves when we experience something. Let's say you were alone and there was no one below the ladder to secure it. What would you say in your heart as you step on that ladder and you're cleaning out your gutters and you realize that the ladder might fall? You say to yourself, oh, I really hope this ladder doesn't fall. And if you're hungry, what will you say? I wish I had something to eat. And this is the human nature, right? To call out in that moment, we're at the bottom of 57, the natural drive to ask whoever is nearby you. And if nobody's there to help you, you yourself are closest to you. You start to ask yourself, oh, I really hope I can find some food. I really hope this ladder doesn't fall on my and I splat on my driveway. And this is the nature of Adam, the nature of the Creator in man. Just as it's instinctive to run away from danger, you see a predatory force, a dangerous person, right? You have an instinct around people who are evil, who don't wish us well, people whose emotional who create an emotional pain for us to be around, and we sense they're mazik, they're dangerous people for us, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and we our antennas go up and we tighten up and we become, our fight or flight instinct is triggered. Just as physically you were designed to have eyelashes to protect your eyes from dust entering those eyes, and you were given ribs to cover your heart. It's like you were built with a bulletproof vest, not really a bulletproof vest, but a vest to protect your heart. Because you wore your heart in your sleeve all the time, you'd have a lot of pain. Both, I mean that literally and figuratively. You need a layer to conceal, to protect that heart. One of the most natural instincts in man is to stay alive, is to feel secure and safe. And even, God forbid, when a person, lo aleinu, struggles with depression and has harmful thoughts about themselves, and it goes counter nature, even in their own mind, that's a natural impulse to protect them from what they perceive to be a greater threat or greater harm. We have a natural design to protect ourselves from danger. We ask for help naturally when we need it. This is how we are saved. By the way, the only reason why some people don't ask for help when they need it is because they think that it's a bigger threat to ask for help than it is to get the help. So, for instance, if you're a man on a road trip, everyone knows you're not supposed to ask for directions, right? Because to ask for directions would represent I'm making a joke, but I'm serious, would represent a bigger threat to something that stabilizes you emotionally than finding your way with someone else's assistance, than not finding your way. Being lost is not as scary as having to be told what to do. Now think about that for a moment. We do things, sometimes they're foolish, because we try instinctively to protect our own self-interests. But if you think about it, it's natural. Teva zehu hisoros mishamayim belev kol enosh levakesh al tzaram mikor yeshua dafka. And the need we have, whether it's to bottle it up inside, to ask for other people to assist you, or to call to God, it's a natural impulse to try to protect our greatest interests. Shakash Baruch Hu zeh karov, Nikol karov, and who's closest to us? Who's always at the bottom of that ladder helping us out? Right? Who's the closest of allies? La'amitu in truth, Zoyat Salalom Kotzar. This is your source of salvation from every trouble you can experience. Umutelat al Adam, and it is upon man, it is incumbent upon man, Hashlim Tavazeh Asher Hu Tavanamshi, to fulfill, to complete this natural impulse, to ask for help, to get what you need. To connect us to our real source of salvation. To make second nature the ability to daven always. To always remember who's always closest with us. That Hashem is always our closest friend and ally in our lives. When it comes to this natural impulse, this natural push, that that we all have the impulse to call out to God when we are in danger? Lulei de'eno eni kedai. Hayisi omer de'eno kain chlal el hafich. If I were worthy, he says, I would suggest that this matter is not as it seems. What does that mean? Mashal onoseh ba'gala. Person is traveling in a wagon. Shenidma lo she'atze hayar ratzim likroto. If you are driving in a wagon, fast, or a car, it appears as if the trees in the forest are actually running to you because of perspective and the speed relative to the ground, which is not moving, which is stable. So it looks like the trees are running at you. It's not the truth. So because you're running, it looks like they're running to you. And unless you're trained to know, the eye doesn't know itself who's running to whom. It's hard to tell. This is our case. When we are, I love this line. He says, I'm hesitant to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. And when we are in crisis, God is running to assist us. I'm with you in your pain. But to our eyes, it looks to us falsely as if we're running to God. It's not the case. In truth, he is running to us. And the prayer, therefore, is to acknowledge that he is there at the bottom of the ladder. Help, hold the ladder secure. That's what the prayer is. He's run to us, and we're just sort of reaching out in that moment. But to our eyes, it looks like we have to make a reach for him. So that's an interesting side note. It's not necessarily needed for this inyan, but it's an additional idea that Rav Pinkus is bringing down, and that is that we experience God as if we're reaching out to him. In reality, he's already there all along. He's coming to us.